SAFSTOR matters!
Hi, I'm Marty Cohn, and welcome to the inaugural edition of SAFSTOR Matters, a program that features activities at Entergy Vermont Yankee plant right here in Vernon, Vermont. Since the announcement on August 27, 2013, that the plant would be closed at the end of 2014, a lot of preparation work has been done to transition the plant and the organization to support long-term storage prior to full physical decommissioning. On December 29, 2014, Vermont Yankee ceased power operations after 633 days of continuous operation, a record for the VY site. On January 12, 2015, all the nuclear fuel was removed from the reactor and placed in the spent fuel pool, and VY certified to the NRC that the reactor had permanently ceased operations and was permanently defueled. Vermont Yankee exited the NRC reactor oversight process and commenced the decommissioning inspection program on January 20th, 2015. In this edition, we feature the plant's external affairs manager, Joe Lynch, who will not only tell us about the current plant status, but also what we can expect over the next few years. In addition, Joe will discuss Vermont Yankee's spent fuel management program. Welcome to the program, Joe.
Thanks, Marty.
Joe, before we begin, why don't you say a few words about how did you get here to Vermont Yankee?
Well, Marty, I'm celebrating actually my 33rd year in the nuclear business, all here in New England. During my career, I actually worked at the Vermont Yankee station for about 5 years, and then actually moved on to decommissioning and spent 3 years at Connecticut Yankee, decommissioning that facility. And I spent 4 years at Yankee Row, right out in western Massachusetts, decommissioning that facility. For the last 7 years prior to joining Vermont Yankee, I was at Entergy's Pilgrim Station in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and then asked to join the decommissioning team here at Vermont Yankee based on my experience in that line of work.
Wow, so it's a lot of experience that goes into decommissioning, and you're part of a team with a lot of that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We've put a very good team together of experienced individuals, both knowing the Vermont Yankee plant as well as what it takes to decommission a site.
So Joe, since the August 2013 shutdown announcement, what are some of the significant milestones that we've reached?
Well, first we negotiated a settlement agreement with the state of Vermont. As you know, there was an attempt on the part of Vermont Yankee to renew its license from the 40-year original license to 20 additional years. In the course of doing that, we had some opposition from the state. And then at one point in time when we announced the shutdown, we worked with the state to come up with an agreement that benefited both Entergy and the state. That agreement included three incentives really for the state. One, a $25 million site restoration fund, of which Entergy has paid $10 million into that fund and plans to do an additional $5 million over the next 3 years. We also set up an economic development fund for Windham County. That's $2 million per year over 5 years, and we just made the second payment, so that will benefit businesses in Windham County. And finally, we distributed to the state a little over $5 million in the way of a clean energy fund as well.
So, Joe, what's the current plant status?
Well, the plant is currently going through what we call pre-decommissioning. We're getting ready to set up for what is known as SAFSTOR. So the site is doing certain activities right now, including draining some of the systems, removing some of the hazards. We have recently taken down a few of the small buildings on the periphery of the site to improve our security plan. And all of these activities are leading up to what will be coming over the next several years, and that is transitioning the fuel from the current spent fuel pool to dry cask fuel storage. So we're going through a number of activities right now, readying the site for transition of fuel and entering into SAFSTOR, which is the recognized methodology for entering into decommissioning as approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
So what is that proposed schedule for decommissioning? How long is it going to take?
Well, SAFSTOR allows you 60 years to complete all aspects of decommissioning. So under NRC rules, we have to put together a plan that accomplishes all three phases of decommissioning in the 60 years. So that's physically decommissioning the site and terminating our license with the NRC. We'll also have an obligation to manage the fuel, which is stored on site. And then finally, we have to go through a phase called site restoration. The current schedule is based on how much money that we have in our Nuclear Decommissioning Trust. As at the end of 2014, we had about $665 million in the trust, but the overall cost of decommissioning exceeds that. Our estimate is about $1.24 billion is the total cost of decommissioning. So we are going to go into a schedule that has us essentially storing fuel for a period of time until the Department of Energy can come to the site and start removing that fuel. The best information we have right now is the Department of Energy will start removing the fuel in about 2026. And that'll take about 26 years, and at the end of 2052, we expect that all the fuel will be removed from the site. A short time after that, we'll go into a decommissioning planning phase, about 2061, and then finally start moving into physical decommissioning, completing all activities by 2075. Now with that schedule, which certainly seems to be a long schedule, that's based on an assumption that our decommissioning trust will grow at only 2% per year. That's the number the Nuclear Regulatory Commission permits us to use in our calculations. The reality is our decommissioning trust has grown much greater than that. In fact, we've looked at numbers greater than 5 and 6% per year. So we fully expect to be able to pull that schedule up, but that's the schedule that we published in our PSDAR, one of the documents we sent to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission with our plan. That's our post-shutdown decommissioning activities report.
So when you say we, at one point Vermont Yankee was one of the largest employers in the area. But since the shutdown, that's changed. What's going to happen with the staffing at Vermont Yankee?
Well, when we were operating back in August of 2013, we had a staff that was slightly over 600 employees. When we shut down at the end of 2014 that you noted earlier, we were about 550 staff. That was the staff required to operate the plant. And we also had a separate decommissioning planning organization that we had put together in anticipation of our transition to decommissioning. On or about January 19th of this year, we went through our first staff reduction. We went from 550 to 316 employees. That's what we need right now to continue with the decommissioning planning and to support our emergency planning organization, a very important part of our plan going forward. With that staff reduction, I'm happy to say that most of the people that left Vermont Yankee either took jobs elsewhere within Entergy, within the other sites that we have in the nuclear fleet. Some individuals actually retired and are going on to their second life. And then finally, we were able to find jobs for the majority of the people that were left with local businesses or similar jobs here in the area. At last count, I think we were less than 6 employees that didn't find employment. And in about April of 2016, about a year from now, we plan on yet another staff reduction. We'll go from the current 316 to about 125, 127. That will be commensurate with changes to our emergency plan and the staffing that we need to move to that last phase of SAFSTOR before we go into long-term dormancy. And then finally, at the end of 2020, we expect to be about 50 to 75 employees. The majority of those will be security, and that will be our staffing until we start physical decommissioning.
So there's been a lot of discussion, when you talk about the loss of those kind of numbers of employees, there's an economic and a impact to the area. Is that something that Entergy has looked at? Is there anything that Entergy can do? You talk about this, we have this economic development grant for Windham County, but what else is Entergy doing to kind of offset some of this impact?
Well, Entergy Vermont Yankee has always been a user of local resources, whether it's contractors or local businesses. And it's our commitment going forward as we use some of these local businesses to continue that for as long as there is work to do at Vermont Yankee. And that includes the tri-state area. So it's not only Vermont, but we also use vendors and suppliers in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts. And we're pleased to say that for the first 2 months of this year, January and February, we spent over $1 million on some local businesses. And that includes some construction companies, some consulting firms. We even brought in our own food service from one of the local suppliers right here in Brattleboro, that being Gougers Deli. They provide the lunch and breakfast services at the plant. So it's our commitment to continue to use local labor, and this is not something new. We've been doing this for a long period of time. So we have a familiarity with their capabilities, they have a familiarity with the site, and it's our commitment to continue that for as long as there's work to do as we transition into decommissioning.
It's great, and I'm glad to hear that that's something that we're going to be continuing to do. Now, I just want to shift a little bit here. You know, we were talking about the spent fuel pool, but what's going to happen? Where does the spent fuel end up?
So currently we have both the beginnings of a dry cask fuel storage facility. We have one pad that was constructed on the site, and it contains 13 canisters, which each hold 68 fuel assemblies. Our plan long-term is to build a second pad, and we're in the process of working with the State of Vermont Public Service Board to issue a certificate of public good for the construction of that second pad. When we're all done moving the fuel from the wet spent fuel pool, which the majority of the fuel is still stored right now, we'll have an additional 45 casks stored on both pads for a total of 58. So right now we have about 2,996 spent fuel assemblies still in the spent fuel pool, a little over 880 on the pad, and when we're all done, over 3,000. The entire fuel that we use for the 42 years at Vermont Yankee will be stored on dry cask fuel storage. Our schedule right now is to construct that second pad in 2017, complete that in about 2018, and then we'll go through about a 1-year campaign of completing the movement of fuel from the spent fuel pool to the dry cask. 2019 to 2020 is the schedule for that.
So the plan is to move into these dry casks, and I know we've gotten a lot of inquiries from people who are concerned about security around these dry casks, and for that matter, security in the spent fuel pool. What can you talk a little bit about? Are we safe? What happens if there's a terrorist attack or something like that?
Well, we have security 24/7. These are highly trained security officers. They're fully armed. They have the ability to use those weapons if necessary. We have very extensive camera systems. We have 3 different types of fence systems surrounding the site, from the most inner fence surrounding what we call the protected area of the site. And then we have a security owner-controlled area, and then we have our outer fence. So all that security will remain in place as we transition to essentially just overseeing the spent fuel pool and eventually just the dry cask fuel storage. So we will continue to have security at the site. It will continue to be an NRC regulation. And we'll also, and I think it's very important to understand, that our security force is very closely tied in with local law enforcement, state police, the FBI, Homeland Security. So if there's a threat anywhere in this area, we'll know about it, and we'll actually get support from some of those other organizations. But we will have a standalone, dedicated security force for as long as there's fuel on the site.
Great. Well, we're going to take a short break for this word from Entergy CEO Leo Denault.
For 42 years, the Vermont Yankee Nuclear Power Station has been supplying Vermont with safe, reliable electricity, powering the lives, businesses, and communities across this great state. Vermont Yankee employees have volunteered countless hours, and over the past few years contributed more than $1 million to the communities where they live and work. Working side by side with so many of you, we are proud of the work we've done to improve the lives and livelihoods of our friends and neighbors. On December 29th, Vermont Yankee will stop producing power. But this doesn't mean we're done. In the coming decades, the safe, secure decommissioning of the plant will be our #1 priority. And so as we start the next chapter, and on behalf of all of our employees at Vermont Yankee, we thank the people of Vermont. Entergy is proud to have been part of your lives as you have been part of ours. It's been a privilege to serve you. Thank you.
Welcome back. In this edition of SAFSTOR Matters, we've been hearing from External Affairs Manager Joe Lynch about Vermont Yankee decommissioning. Joe, there's been a lot of talk about the cost of decommissioning. What are some of the key assumptions that went into determining that cost?
Well, we talked a little bit about some of the milestones that we've established as we get ready for the long-term SAFSTOR period. So again, we plan on building a second dry cast fuel storage pad starting in about 2017 once we get approval from the state of Vermont. Then we will go into the phase of transitioning fuel from the wet spent fuel pool to dry 2019 to 2020. Right now it's anticipated, best available information, that the fuel that's stored on the site will begin to be removed by the Department of Energy in around 2026. That'll take some 25 years, so in about 2052, I believe, is the current estimate for when all the fuel will be off-site. And then based on where we are with our decommissioning cost estimate and where we are with our nuclear decommissioning trust, we expect to start physical decommissioning around 2068. And then that'll take about 6 years and then about another 1.5 years for site restoration. So those are the assumptions that have gone into this cost estimate that I had talked about previously.
So what is the decommissioning cost estimate? How much money are we talking about, and also how are we going to pay for it?
Well, the overall estimate is broken down into 3 elements. The total cost of decommissioning in 2014 dollars is $1.242 billion. And it's made up of 3 elements. The first is what we call terminating our license. That's the physical dismantlement of the site, shipping off of that material. That's currently estimated to be about $817 million. The site restoration, which is the next phase, once the site has been removed, you have to restore the site back to some standards that still have to be established. And we have to work with the state of Vermont on how we want to leave the site. And it's very, very important to understand what the end use of the site is going to be. So if the end use of the site is going to be another power plant, that would inspire certain cleanup standards. However, if the site's going to be a park or a boat launch or something that utilizes the Connecticut River, that might inspire a different cleanup standard. Nonetheless, we've estimated very conservatively the site restoration cost to be about $57 million. And then finally, one of the unfortunate things, having spent fuel on the site, there's a very high cost associated with not only moving fuel from wet to dry, but also overseeing that fuel for the period of time until Department of Energy has removed it. That spent fuel management cost is about $368 million. So those are the 3 elements that make up the total cost of $1.242 billion. As I mentioned earlier, right now in the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust, or at the end of 2014 is the latest number that we've put out, we have about $665 million. Now, while it seems like there's a huge gap between that and the $1.242 billion, if you look at just the physical cost of decommissioning at $817 million, you can see we're not that far off. The Nuclear Decommissioning Trust is just that. It's a trust that's overseen by an independent bank, that being Mellon Bank, and it's being invested very conservatively, but we've seen very, very good growth of the Nuclear Decommissioning Trust, and we fully expect that'll grow much faster than the cost to do decommissioning, and that's where we've come up with our overall schedule for the project.
So looking at the $368 million for the spent fuel management, that's monies that obviously we can get back from the United States government because we've contributed monies to a fund and we can get that money back. But in order to get started, how is Entergy planning to get started? Are we just going to take money out of the Nuclear Trust Fund? How are we going to get the dry cast program started?
Well, that's a good question. Entergy recognizes that pulling all of that money out of the trust, the initial cost of moving the fuel from wet to dry, which is a current estimate of about $143 million, and then the annual cost of overseeing the safety of the spent fuel pool, Entergy has taken on their own the initiative to get 2 credit agencies lined up, totaling $145 million. And what we'll do is we will fund the transition of the fuel from the wet spent fuel pool to dry cast fuel storage over the next 4 years by using those private funds. And then as soon as that work is done, we will be suing the Department of Energy, as just about every site that has a dry cast fuel storage facility is allowed to do. And the reason for that is all of the licensees, all of the owners of nuclear power stations in the country have a contract with the Department of Energy that dates back to the 1980s, where we've been putting money into a fund for the promise that the United States government would build a federal repository for spent nuclear fuel. Unfortunately, the government has not followed through on that obligation. They broke their contractual obligations to Entergy, Vermont Yankee, and others, so we're allowed to sue them for damages, and that being the cost of keeping fuel stored on the site. So we will sue the Department of Energy. We expect to get the majority of the money back, the $143 million for spent fuel transfer, and that's how we'll pay that back. But the real message here is we're going to not take that money out of the trust and allow the trust to grow that much faster.
So it sounds like that balance, 368 minus the 145, about $225 million, that's monies that would come out of the Nuclear Trust Fund, but it seems that we need to put some kind of attention to getting the government to move a little bit faster, because the sooner we get that spent fuel off of the site, obviously the quicker we'll be able to do decommissioning.
Absolutely. And the message that we try to get out to our stakeholders is if you really have an interest in moving this along, you need to lobby, our elected officials here in the state of Vermont and other states to pass the legislation to build a federal repository. As many of us know, Yucca Mountain was supposed to be the repository for spent nuclear fuel for the entire industry, and that has had starts and stops, and here we are many years later, and a lot of money spent on the research in that, and unfortunately, we're no further along with the repository. So our message is to our stakeholders, to the people that have an interest in moving along the process, if we can get our electeds to make the proper messages to the decision makers to start a federal repository, that could speed up the whole process, eliminate the need to have to sue the Department of Energy, and ultimately get the fuel moved off site, which will speed up the start of decommissioning for Vermont Yankee and other facilities.
So when you talk about getting your message out, aside from appearing on SAFSTOR Matters, how can folks learn about decommissioning?
Well, we have a number of ways that we've been trying to get our message out. One of the things that was formed as part of Vermont legislation is a citizens advisory panel. The Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel, or NDCAP, is a forum, a group of individuals that includes 6 members of the public, along with some electeds. There's some folks from Entergy on the board. There's some people who are actual decision makers with the state, including commissioners from the Agency for Natural Resources and the Public Service Board. There's representatives from the Vermont Department of Health. We've been meeting approximately monthly since September, and at those meetings we provide an update on decommissioning and talk about issues that are important to the folks in Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and also it's an education for some of the things that are both affecting the industry and as well trying to get our message out. So that's one way. 2, we've sponsored a number of tours at the site. In fact, earlier this week, we were proud to have 3 of the newly elected legislators here in Windham County. We had Representative Laura Sibilia, we had Representative Emily Long, and Senator Becca Ballant all tour the site to see exactly what we're doing, to see what has changed since we shut the plant down, to show them the security and the thought that's going into our transition towards decommissioning. So we're encouraging people, important stakeholders, to come to the site and see what we're doing. We have our own website now, vydecommissioning.com, where we post all of the information relative to decommissioning, whether it's presentations or news clips or anything that we think the public would benefit from. And we're doing a lot of outreach. We're doing certain forums to get information out. In fact, yesterday we were in Massachusetts, in Greenfield, at Greenfield Community College, and we held an information forum for anyone who wanted to attend, but the focus was on people in Massachusetts to make sure they had a voice and they had the ability to ask us questions. So through those different types of forums, we're trying to get our message out. We're trying to be open, communicative, and transparent, and making sure people understand what we're doing and give them the opportunity to ask some questions.
Well, Joe, it sounds like Entergy is trying to tell its story and is open to hearing questions and concerns. And I want to thank you for being on our inaugural show. Thanks also to Dennis Cordell for writing that original music for this show, music that you're probably going to be whistling the rest of the day. Also want to thank Sarah Burnap, who is, for all her behind-the-scenes magic, she's the producer of this show. And I also want to thank the folks here at BCTV for allowing us to produce a show that we feel is important to get the word out about what's going on at Vermont Yankee. Our next edition will discuss the changes to Vermont Yankee's emergency response organization. So for all of us at Vermont Yankee, I'm Marty Cohn. Thanks for watching.